Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, we're very privileged to have Robina Courtin speak with us today. Robina is originally from Australia and has been a Tibetan nun for 19 years and will be giving a Dharma talk today.
Well, let's hope it's Dharma. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I don't know much about the different presentations of Buddhism apart from Tibetan Buddhist. But I know that the fundamentals, like in Christianity, the fundamentals are the same, but the way of presenting and the ways of practicing perhaps are different. The thing that I get most from Buddhism, that I like most, is that it has to be experiential, that what I'm trying to do is look into my mind, learn through listening to the teachings, through practicing, learning to know, first and foremost, learning to know about my own mind, about what's going on inside Robina. The immensely complicated kind of, soup of emotions that we all have as humans, learning to kind of become clear about what that is, to distinguish the positive energy from the negative, to learn to know how to identify, to learn to know what my potential is, to learn to know how to develop that potential for my sake and for the sake of others. And that all the teachings, certainly in the Tibetan tradition, which I think maybe is different from the Zen, I don't know, there's an emphasis on listening to Buddha's teachings, listening to his explanations philosophically, psychologically, whatever, about the nature of reality, about how the mind functions, in order to use it for yourself, in order to transform something in yourself. So, as a religion, as a philosophy, as a psychology, the bottom line in Buddhism, the point, what Buddha is demanding is that we take all of it, whatever it is that we take and listen to, we take it and use it inside. That it's got to be experiential. It's got to be one's own. It's not just meant to be left in the realm of the head or in the realm of just doing some kind of ritual or some kind of practice, for the sake of it. Which I think is something fairly prevalent in the West. When we listen to philosophy in the West, when we listen to psychology in the West, we usually leave it in the realm of ideas. We have these very brilliant minds, in the West. And Tibetan Lamas have, in my experience, have commented on the phenomenal intelligence of those of us in this culture, and that. And one of the hardest things is one Lama, Lama Yeshe, one of my Lamas, he said that it's really difficult for us to digest, to take the teachings and make them tasty, to digest them, or to fertilize them, to make them something real, to take them from here to here. And this is the point, and I'm finding even though in the Tibetan tradition there is an emphasis on listening to the teachings, really looking deeply at Buddha's explanation of the nature of mind, how it functions, what it is, what it isn't, on the nature of karma, really going deeply into the principles of karma, how karma functions, why we experience, what is negative, what is positive, all this, That no matter how deeply you can go with the intellect, that it's a stepping stone to it's a stepping stone to the experience, and that I think is the point, and that's when it becomes real for us. And really, it is just like learning the recipe in order to make the cake. We can be very brilliant at knowing recipes, but we'd know we'd be pretty stupid if we just only knew the recipe and never made the cake. You'd never dare to call yourself a cook, you understand? You'd be embarrassed to say that you were a cook. Well, we do this very happily in the West. We learn masses of ideas. We have endless kind of understandings of a dozen different philosophies and a dozen different approaches of the mind, But we haven't got a clue sometimes, and it's not even demanded of us in the West to actually take that and put it into practice. And it really is as foolish as learning the recipe and never making the cake. Or as one Lama said, as foolish as looking at a picture of a pizza and thinking it's the real thing, It's just, so that's something, and that's something that I'm certainly finding from my own experience, that there's no contradiction, and this is what is stressed in the Tibetan, say, some aspects of the Tibetan Buddhist practice, that there's no contradiction between theory and ideas and the conceptual level, having that knowledge clearly, and then learning to put it into practice and make it tasty. Because like any words, if, it's something quite, I think we've got, there's a huge amount of words in the West, isn't it? But we don't know how to get the reality out of those words. Often the words are just describing some fantasy that doesn't exist. And for their own sake, they sound interesting. But I think, and this is what I'm finding with Buddha's teachings, if the words that you're hearing, you make them, they lead you to the experience, and those words are very powerful. It's not just a question of there being empty concepts. A concept is only empty and useless if it's not real, do you see? And that's in a way pointing to a certain way of discussing Buddha's comprehension, Buddha's explanation of reality and Buddha's explanation of the human psychology. That one way of looking at what the mind is, mind or consciousness, and in the way we talk, these words are used synonymously. And this is where we're learning to work. As one Lama said, the workshop is in the mind or in the consciousness. And so in these terms, mind or consciousness refers to the whole of your inner experiences, the conceptual, the intellectual, the emotional, the unconscious, the subconscious, whatever level you want to posit, This is all encompassed by the word mind or consciousness. So the point is to learn to transform that. The point is to learn to transform that, not somebody else's, your own. And then on the basis of this, you're capable then of reaching out to others and being beneficial, being useful. And so, Buddha's explanations of the mind, basically he's talking about how we have in the mind a bunch of misconceptions. In other words, conceptual concepts that actually are misconceptions. They're mistaken. They're like saying, that is blue. Now, we all know, according to relative reality, you maybe use grey to refer to that colour. So, what Buddha's saying is that not all concepts, finally, yes, we've got to go beyond concepts. When one experiences reality directly, is the way of saying it, when we've realised the true nature of how things are, oneself and others, then that is beyond conceptual. Just like the taste of that cake is beyond the recipe. Do you see? But what this emphasis in Buddhism is that you need the recipe, you need those those words, 3 of this and 2 of that, which in their own are useless. But when leading you to the taste, they have great power. So once you get the taste and once you can automatically conjure up that cake, you don't need the recipe. Do you see? It's exactly, and that's the emphasis in the Tibetan Buddhist training, So words can be super powerful. And so these misconceptions, what I'm getting to here is that Buddha's saying that within the mind we have a bunch of so-called positive qualities and a bunch of so-called negative ones. In other words, and one of the interesting ways of seeing this is, not rather than in a religious sense of being good and bad, moral and immoral, that one of the qualities of the negative states of mind is that they are misconceptions. They're faulty. They're like saying blue is green. They're faulty, they're mistaken. So in that way, those misconceptions cause suffering. So they're the conceptual states of mind that cause us to be neurotic and confused and obsessed and unhappy and attached and craving and angry and jealous and insane and demented and all the rest. Which we all know about, right? So somehow they are the ones we've got to get rid of. So we don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater. You don't chuck out love and compassion and kindness and clarity, which are at this level that we're at, conceptual also. We don't throw those out. We have to develop those to the point where they become non-conceptual. But the concepts that are useless to us are these misconceptions. And they basically, one word to refer to those, another word, is that they're delusions. They're deluded states of mind, which is actually quite a good word. My God, she's so deluded, we say. And that means we think, the person's making up stuff. They don't see things as they are, in an ordinary sense. Well, that's a very useful way of seeing these deluded states of mind we have. So basically what Buddha's saying is attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, all the rest, all these things that we so know as human beings, they're deluded in the sense that they're misconceptions, in the sense that they are not accurate assessments of what is going on. So knowing what is and all these things which sound very interesting actually have a real meaning, you know. It's what we have to learn to do through meditation, through the work inside, is learn to know well this mind. And that means to be able to unravel, to be able to see what is inside oneself. So because we're constantly, 24 hours a day, you know, unless we're deeply in sleep, we're actually experiencing, aren't we? All the time we're experiencing something in here in response to something out there. Now, most of the time what we're focusing on is the stuff out there. We're describing what's out there. He this, she that, it this. And they're the things that we see as the cause of the experiences we have in here. That's samsara, basically. And that's the major misconception of all. That we actually, you know, we're actually seeing out there and are obsessed with out there, seduced by what's out there, and demanding and grasping at what's out there, pushing away at what's out there. Because we instinctively, and this is the deep, you know, one of the deepest misconceptions. We instinctively believe that that's reality out there. That's good, bad, happy, sad, therefore wantable, not wantable, out there. Well, the major shift as Buddhists, you know, the major shift we have to make, which is immensely hard, is to begin to notice more vividly in here, not out there. Because that's the beginning of the work, you know. That's the mind. What we think and feel and the responses, the emotions, the feelings, the conceptions, all the stuff going on 24 hours a day in here. That's what we have to become familiar with. And that actually is the meaning of the Tibetan word for meditation, gom. To become familiar with this one, not with that one. We're very good at being familiar with that one. We're super good in the West at analysing everybody else's problems, and we're the best therapists for everybody else. We know exactly within 5 minutes of meeting a person, he this, she that, wow, so controlled, blah, blah, anger this, jealous that. You know. We're very good at analysing everybody else. We're super quick and super good at it. Handsome, ugly, fat, thin, intellectual, not this, grasping something. I mean, we know everything within 5 minutes. And we're hungrily looking, aren't we? This is the point. And what we're doing at the same time with that kind of super clever conceptual capacity that we have, which is a good thing, but can be used powerfully if we turn it inside. This is the point. That kind of incisive clarity that we have, if we turn it inside, we can develop so quickly. We can get what we want so quickly. And what do we want? We want happiness. We want to feel good. We want to be content. We want to feel comfortable. We want to feel blissful if we dare, you know. Well, we can. That's what Buddha's saying. Honey, you can. Okay. And the method is learning to look inside. And there's plenty to look at, you know. And somehow we sort of know what's going on inside. We all experience what we experience. It's all too kind of overwhelming sometimes. We know this. But kind of the way we're looking and how we're dealing with it is kind of not quite clear enough. So it seems to become an obsessive looking, an obsessive sort of self-centered looking that doesn't get anywhere. So the kind of clarity that we have to develop is the capacity to look. But this is again stressed in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that is, looking itself isn't enough. It's just this, it's like an analogy would be you've got this big, massive, overgrown garden full of green things. But you're not a botanist. You haven't got a clue what that's called and what this herb is and that weed and that flower and that rose bush and that tree. You don't know the names for anything. So learning to be mindful and looking perfectly at your garden for an hour every day will indeed help you memorise exactly and even draw what is there. But it's useless if you want to actually do anything with that garden, if you want to develop it into something marvellous. You can't do that by just being mindful, by just looking. You have to know how to label what is there. You have to know the function of that weed and that flower and that herb, the relationships, how they work, what is positive, what is negative, in a relative sense, because we're talking at a relative level here. So that's what we have to do with our mind, and that's the stress in the Tibetan Buddhist training. And we have to learn, in other words, learn the botany of our mind. We're talking here Buddha's explanation of how the mind functions, what is ignorance, the main root delusion, how come it causes us to grasp at the eye, what's the nature of that grasping, how does it feel, what is it, what isn't it, what causes it, why this, how it gives rise to the other delusions called attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, all the rest. Learning to know well, first intellectually, these things by listening to the teachings, and then through the techniques of meditating, and there are many techniques, one learns to become familiar. It's like then you open your eyes, and when you've imbued your looking now with intelligence, you can start to see, wow, that's a weed, and its function is this, and if I move this and have this and do this, it'll bring this and that. So slowly your vision of this marvellous garden can come in the future. So through this work, the vision of our own marvellous potential of enlightenment, which Buddha says each of us possesses naturally. And that's nothing esoteric here. We're talking at a simple psychological level of a perfect mind, a mind, an experience, a being full of all the perfect qualities, totally empty of all the negative qualities. It's as simple as that. Okay, a person having experienced that is beyond our imagination. That's a Buddha, enlightened being. But that it's a psychological state. There's nothing mystical in the sky in heaven after you die, So having a comprehension of what is negative, what is positive, what is this one, how does that weed, what is this, blah, 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 then using, with that knowledge, looking at one's own mind, slowly beginning to uncover what is there, recognising what is there, distinguishing between, for example, attachment and love, which actually diametrically opposed, but which feel the same, which we taste as the same, which come together. But if, for example, love is a positive quality, it's something altruistic, it's a delight that the other be happy, it's a wish that the other be happy, it's necessarily altruistic. But that attachment, in the way Buddhism would describe, is in its nature deluded, in its nature negative, it's grasping, it's needy, it's hungry, it's neurotic, it therefore causes to manipulate and all the rest. It causes suffering, in other words, to oneself and others. But we mix that with love. It comes with love. We don't have it for a person we don't love, and we never love a person we're not attached to. So somehow we assume they are the same. So we make this huge mistake. So one of the jobs is we have to learn, first of all, to know what is love. How is it defined? How does it function? What does it feel like? What is it? How do you develop it? What are the causes of it? Which initially are just intellectual. But like anything, that cake is initially intellectual. And then you learn about attachment. What is it? If Buddha is asserting that attachment is the cause of suffering, and if you want to be happy, you better get rid of it, then we better find out what it is. We don't want to be chucking the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want to be misinterpreting. We better be really careful. If he's saying it's a weed and you've got to get rid of it, well, if you start pulling out all the herbs instead because they look like it, you're going to be in trouble. So you've got to know real carefully what is attachment, how does it function, and then also learning to taste it, to feel the pain of it, to see how it is true, what Buddha says, if it's true. He says, check up. Don't just believe me. He says, don't believe a word I'm saying. Now, if he's asserting this thing called attachment is a cause of your suffering, we better be very careful. Like Lama Zopa said, one Lama, when you hear you've got to get rid of attachment in order to be happy, you get lonely. It feels unhappy. You feel like you've got to give up your happiness. Your heart has to be taken out of your body. That's because we misinterpret. We confuse it with that herb. We misinterpret it. So we better learn very carefully what it is and what it isn't, to distinguish it from something positive and wholesome and beneficial and connected and empathetic and altruistic called love. Even pleasure, even pleasure. When we try to be religious, even pleasure has a slightly kind of dirty taint to it, doesn't it? Oh, pleasure. But actually, looking really simply in Buddhist terms, when you look at what pleasure or being pleased or being happy means, it's actually the natural state of our mind. It's something utterly natural. It's something necessarily constructive, positive. It cannot be negative, an experience of pleasure. But because we connect it with grasping and attachment, then we taint it. So when we think we've got to give up attachment, we immediately think we've got to give up pleasure. So that's why we all walk around looking like holy Buddhists, thinking we're trying to be renounced and detached. But again, we've chucked the baby out with the bathwater, So it's like we're really harming ourselves by not knowing what is this attachment, for example. This is the thing, you know. So love in its nature is constructive and positive. It must develop. Pleasure, delight, happiness, joy. It's the right and the natural state of the human mind. And actually, if you can think of it this way, when the pollution of attachment, for example, is utterly removed from our mind, then we naturally are in the state of pleasure. Naturally. But it's natural. It's not deluded and grasping. That's attachment. But it's just naturally there. And the irony of attachment, which we connect with pleasure, which we connect with love, the irony of it is that it actually prevents us from really experiencing pure joy. The more attachment, in fact, the less pleasure. That's the irony. You check. When you're really grasping, even to that simple piece of chocolate cake, forget about bodies, you know. Let's just be humble here, right? Even that piece of cake, you know, is impossible for us to distinguish, to really be clear. When you're hungry for that cake, look at the fantasies in the mind. And that's one of the functions of attachment. It makes a fantasy. It's a fantasy. It's a story the mind makes up, an exaggerated description of the qualities of that chocolate cake, of the capacity of that chocolate cake to give me pleasure. And the more instinctive that is, the more deep it is, the more hungry we are for it, and the more we fantasize it, the less we see it, and the more we grasp at it, the less pleasure we get, you know. You're desperate that somebody else is going to get it. You're hungrily sort of manipulated to try and get it. You shove it in, taste it, have another one, and before you know it, you're full and fat, you know. And where's the pleasure? We've missed it completely. Sorry. So somehow, you know, if you can just imagine the mind and, you know, oneself, an experience of joy, but without the neurosis, without the grasping, without the fear of losing, without the franticness, without that hunger, without that neediness, without that depression, without the jealousy, without the anger, without all the other junk that is there in this desperate wish for happiness, which is our natural state, which is the right, if you wish, the natural right of a human being, of a being, to be happy. So that is nothing wrong. To wish to be happy doesn't mean attachment. The wish to be happy is something instinctive and natural. The capacity to be happy, Buddha says, is our natural state. But the problem why we never get it is because we are misunderstanding the causes of it. And the instinct, this is samsara we're talking about, is ancient, many lives ancient, old instinct of attachment which is polluting and is causing us to mistakenly grasp at the things out there as if they in themselves have the capacity to give me that pleasure. But that is a load of rubbish. It is not possible. One of the jobs of a chocolate cake is not to make you happy. Forget about that person. One of the jobs of others is not to make us happy, even though it sounds a contradiction. Because in a sense you can say our job is to bring happiness to others. But attachment exaggerates it, distorts it, you know, makes a bigger story, fantasizes it, kind of describes, exaggerates the qualities of that person and makes them bigger than they are. And we all know about attachment in this way, you know. And then so what becoming familiar with our mind is, part of the process, is by learning to hear again and again how attachment is a misconception. It's a lie. It's not a correct description of what is real. It distorts and exaggerates the good qualities of a person or thing or a sound or whatever it is, you know. And it's deeply instinctive. So why it sounds so just a bit abstract to say it's a misconception. It feels like a big fat lump of emotion in the heart, doesn't it? So where's the conception? Conception's in the head. Well, the more, you know, when we can, the reason there's this huge emotional component there is because it's an ancient habit. For eons, Buddha says, we've been locked into this ancient habit. So we know with habits you've even developed for a week, already it's, you know, habitual. Already you don't notice that twitch in the eye. You've been doing it only for a week. So you imagine something you've had for eons, how deep the habit must be. And so how hard it is to see, because you are oneness with that habit. You're permeated by it. So the emotional content is there because of the ancientness of the habit. But the more we can observe the nature of this attachment, the way it functions, the more we can begin to lessen the emotional component in order to start to see how it is conceptual. It's a story the head makes up, and it's a story that the hungry me believes in. I've got massive vested interest in believing in that instinct that is there so deeply in me. So it's not a fast process, this unravelling, of these emotional kind of states that we have. But the becoming familiar with them is just vital, absolutely vital. And that all has to be in the context, though, of our marvellous human potential, which I think we totally do not even recognise in the West. We're so literal. I mean, it's not part of our materialistic society. We know that. I mean, who has told you since you were born you have marvellous potential, darling? You know what I mean? It's not part of our parents' culture. It's not part of anything. To recognise and acknowledge and affirm and try to help develop the inner human potential. We're not talking something esoteric here. We're talking something simple, human, psychological. Human potential means love, generosity, kindness, patience, clarity, wisdom, bliss. You name all those words which we all know about. Well, the development of each of these to the nth degree, that's what our potential is. That's enlightenment, putting it simply. And that's human. We have it here. It's within us now. You don't get it from out there, which is what delusion thinks about attachment. That's why we grasp so frantically at that person, that cake. Because the instinct of attachment, which actually feels bereft and empty, doesn't acknowledge and believe in any potential inside here, which is why we're so hungry for that divine person out there, to shove them in every sense we can, to bring the happiness we so desperately want, and which is our potential. So here, again, it's not a moralistic issue. In Buddhist terms, it's not a moralistic issue, it's a practical one. We have this potential to be blissful, clear, infinitely compassionate. I mean, you describe enlightenment, according to the teachings we receive, essentially a being who is enlightened isn't just a happy person. I'm trying to just use it in a practical way. But when you've really removed all the pollution, your mind, your consciousness is literally as big as the universe. It literally is said to be that an enlightened being has omniscience. Just how we talk about God. That your consciousness literally pervades the universe, which literally means you can see all reality. You see the minds of all beings, all past, all present and all future. You have such powerful compassion and empathy for every living being. It is as if they were oneself. And a Buddha has the power to do effortlessly whatever needs to be done to benefit each living being. So we're not just talking a simple thing here, enlightenment. But that is the result of this process of removing utterly all pollution from our mind. So if you hear that, and you hear how far you are from knowing the minds of all living beings and having compassion for everyone, then you can see the extent of the delusions, which isn't made to feel depressed. It's a question of just seeing how big the job is and not to be impatient, So becoming familiar, this is one way of saying, is of the meaning, of the function of meditation, let's say. And in Tibetan Buddhist tradition we have many types of techniques, many techniques. And all of them are for the purpose of helping us do that. And then of developing the marvellous qualities within us, removing the pollution, developing our natural qualities of goodness and clarity and wisdom and bliss and all the rest, and therefore of compassion and all the rest in relation to others. Mahayana Buddhism, which Zen and Tibetan are, says that a bird needs 2 wings to fly. One is wisdom, the other is compassion. And wisdom, if you like, is the result. The wisdom that sees clearly how things are is the result of all this inner work, one's own work of becoming familiar, removing the delusions, developing one's own marvellous qualities, developing one's own liberation, achieving one's own nirvana, which is just a word that refers to the state of mind of the person who, through doing this work, has cut completely the roots of all delusion, has removed completely all pollution. That's nirvana. Again, it's just a word for a psychological state. That's the wisdom side. That's one's own work. Then on the basis of this, you act towards others. Compassion. That's what compassion is, necessarily something active. It comes, from the inner, from this wisdom. and from the active development of compassion, the wish that others not suffer. But then when it's fully expressed, it naturally becomes active. It's not possible to not act. It's not to do for others. So a person who has achieved nirvana from their own side, will then only want again and again and again and again to be reborn spontaneously for the sake of others, in order to benefit others. That's what a bodhisattva is. A person who has done the work, essentially cut most of the problems from their own side, only now wishing to benefit others. So effortlessly taking rebirth after rebirth, but actually putting into action this compassion, this wish that others don't suffer. Well, I could chat away, but maybe he's dying to ask a question. He's standing up about, bursting with it. Say it.
Yeah. Allow me to be a witness to your talk and your statement and your teaching. And I was really touched. And previously, after a meditative session, we talked briefly about your lineage. And I was fortunate to read something once I started getting exposure to the Dharma.
Uh-huh.
And your talk just reinforced the things I learned.
Good.
From the books I read.
Okay.
Even it lies in the same lineage as yours. And I want to say that how that liberated me.
Good.
Over only a very short period of time, about 4, 5, 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I feel so liberated, and I could relate to what you said. You naturally feel certain things arising from your mind, so you can see things in a very more realistic view. And when you say about the delusions, what I read was termed obscurations.
Yeah,
That's
different ways of
basically
saying
the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't put much effort in meditation. However, I could feel the transformation in my mind.
Good.
By reading this material.
Good.
Intellectually understanding. And I feel liberated. And
Good.
I also understand that it's a gradual path to a practice, Dharma.
Sure, that's right.
And in the short term, the Buddhist teachings gives you a lot of good, effective antidotes to counteract the negative emotions, anger, resentment, jealousy, to achieve short-term effect. But the long-term goal is to attain the removal of all the delusions, obscurations. And when you reach there, it's effortlessly to see things clearly. As David said yesterday at the Relation Forum, to end the sorrow and the pain and the suffering is to see through it. So I took that as when you see through it, you can see clearly. Without your selflessness intervene. And when I understood that, and when I couldn't describe the feelings, but I feel such a bliss.
Good.
And liberated.
Good.
And
We'll just keep moving.
I can. Yeah.
Keep moving. Just keep trying. Yes. Anybody else have something to say? Yes.
Yeah. So we have the recipe for the cake. We make it, and then we share it, right? Can we have our cake and eat it too?
Sure thing. You can have everything. Nothing to lose.
By meditating and integrating the meditation, what we learn into our practice. I guess that's
into your life, really. Yeah. I mean, learning more and more clearly to see, to recognize, to have the courage to see the garbage in you. Why? Not because you're a horrible person, but because you've got this incredible potential to be unbelievably marvellous, and if you listen to the description of an unbelievably marvellous being called an enlightened being and you check that maybe you're not like that yet, that's your potential, you think, wow, what is it that's preventing me? I better find out and fix it. So then what is that? It's not just the good qualities. You've got to see those, but the thing you're trying to look for initially is the garbage, because that's what's holding you back. So without any moralistic sense or guilt or shame or neurosis, you're delighted. You want to see the limitations. You want to recognise attachment. You want to have the courage to remove it, even though initially it's really painful. Why? Because for eons you've believed that's been the cause of happiness, but now you're changing. So it's like giving up being a junkie. You know, we're basically junkies for every object. That's what attachment is. We're all junkies. So that's painful. It's in fact outrageously painful. But if you can be clear about why, how come it does cause suffering, then it, in fact, and then by looking into your mind and seeing that in fact it does, not just believing Buddha, then you will have a huge vested interest in wanting to get rid of it. And then slowly, more clarity coming every day, less suffering. Initially it's painful. It's like going on a fast. All the junk comes out. You're smelly and revolting and pimples and caca, and it's awful. But you know the long term is you're going to be real clean. You understand what I mean? So it's a painful process. It's not an easy process being a meditator. It's not an easy process practicing what we're talking about here. It's not just all bliss and flowers and everyone's lovely. It feels awful. It's very painful. If you're really practicing, it's very painful. It's not painful yet means you haven't started practicing yet. Really. So be brave. Yes.
This is very inspiring. I'm just very moved.
Oh.
And but I've been seeing in my own practice that this is a very long path,
yes,
a long journey.
Exactly.
I don't think I'm going to make it this time around. It looks to me like at the rate I'm going, I've got a few more eons.
Okay, I know.
You know, and sometimes I find that very depressing.
I know, exactly. But that's one of the things that I remember the Dalai Lama saying is, you know, when we can misunderstand the Buddhist thing about no self and no I, we get a bit depressed. He says, listen, a bodhisattva has a huge ego. But meaning they have really not the deluded ego, but they have this huge sense of perseverance and determination and the wish to never give up. First, because they see the benefits to themselves, and second, because of their great compassion. So that just means the more you can see the advantage of the result, the more you have the perseverance. In other words, when one simple way the Lamas always say, when you know the benefits of something, you're going to work real hard to get it. So the more, this is what I get from the Tibetan Buddhist approach of listening to the teachings and hearing the description of an enlightened being and really relating it to myself. And then, secondly, meeting beings who are said to be embodiments of this energy, like the Dalai Lama, for example. You know, if I think, okay, at even whatever level I am, if that is what enlightenment is, when I hear about his qualities and see him and see the response that people have to him, then thank you, I'd like to be like that. Do you see? So if he's the proof of the pudding, then I want to work very hard and to persevere. And most of all, too, it's like he shows me. And this is what I think the power of having a teacher is. It's the proof that that it works, the method works. So if you've got a person staring you in the face who is the example of what it's like, then you have more reason to persevere because you know it's possible. It's like if you only ever listen to music on records, you're never going to be that inspired to really work hard. But if you meet Bach, you're going to be really inspired. You're going to know, I want to be like that, please. Do you see? So I think then depression eventually goes and just determination comes.
Keep fellowship then.
That absolutely vital, I tell you. So important. Really. Yes. Oh, there's somebody here. Just a second. Please, you next. Go on.
This is two-part, unrelated parts, but
okay.
I don't want to forget.
Sure.
Did you say that attachment is very intuitive?
Say it again.
Did you say that attachment is very intuitive?
Not intuitive, instinctive. In other words, deeply ingrained.
Okay.
There's nothing, and I'm not using instinctive here in a sense of being any of good or bad. We tend to give it a fairly rigid meaning in the West. If it's instinctive, it's kind of natural, therefore it's right. But instinctive, in Buddhist terms, simply means you're doing it that often, it comes naturally. So a murderer is a person who kills just spontaneously, or like you see animals. Some of them, just their nature is to kill. So we rarefied that a bit in the West. So anyway, instinctive means you've been doing it so often, there's no thought. You just, boom, you go into it.
The other part is, more recently, I have been practicing compassion very consciously.
Wonderful.
And I'm getting somewhat depressed because
yes,
as I do
exactly.
that, I'm aware of how little compassion
That's
there is in the world, and then in how governments and
That's
leaders,
Sure.
It's not even part of the dialogue.
No, exactly, you're right. That's where it's interesting, but where the more, they say, the more wisdom you've got, this wing here, the more it empowers your compassion and you never give up. In other words, one of the qualities of wisdom is that you see more and more clearly why you are suffering and why people are suffering. So, in the Buddhist view, the concept of karma, and if we've got time we can give 5 minutes to that just to describe, because we spend a lot of time working with that in our practice, really going deeply into the explanations of how come they are suffering, how come these people are locked into the system, how come there's so much pain, how come this. The more you understand why something, that's one of the practical, conventional levels of wisdom. The more you have, the compassion is becoming strong. In other words, compassion without wisdom, you give up, you go crazy, you get destroyed. There's no hope. So wisdom gives compassion great strength. Because it's sort of like anything. If you know why it's happening, there's less fear, there's less panic, there's less ignorance, there's less why me, there's less kind of anguish. You know why. And you learn from that why. And that imbues your compassion with a lot of determination and strength. And you don't give up. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Please.
As I'm sitting now in my practice, a lot of I get very caught in my body.
Yes.
Very tight.
Yes. Yeah.
And it just, I'm just aware of the ways in which I can soften into that and work with it, and stay with it. But I'm being used by it also. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts on how we work with our body in terms of our sensation, or makes sense. I can get thoroughly caught up.
I know, I understand. I understand.
What do you think?
I understand. See, I'll tell you from my perspective, and I think it's probably quite different. I don't know much about your tradition, what the approach is, but I can tell you, just another... Yeah, okay. Well, then, another way, I would say, for example, another approach, and there are many different approaches, that's the point, many different ways of, that sometimes you can, that another approach could be that... I'm getting complicated here. Wait a minute. Yeah. First of all, meditation literally has nothing to do with the body. So just remembering this. Okay, where we're talking here, we have body and we have mind, or we have body and we have consciousness. Okay, obviously at the level we're at now, which is the human one, the gross level of our consciousness is intimately connected, is inseparable from our body, so our sensory experiences. So technically, even the way we're describing here, Buddhism would say the sensory consciousness isn't technically the body, but the consciousness is kind of expressed through the body. So body technically isn't the consciousness, even though it's almost impossible to separate right now. But even just to know this is interesting. So meditation, in a sense, has got nothing to do with the body. And the body is a big fat obstacle in the way. What we're trying to do is get in touch with the inner part of the mind, the mental consciousness, and eventually to go beyond the body. This is the goal, right? So, of course, most of us are stuck in this body. Our gross consciousness is so active, so busy, so vibrating, isn't it? The sensory and the conceptual level. We very rarely get past that. I'm just giving this as a preamble, okay?
You don't see this as a dualism, mind versus body?
Well, no, it's not a question of dualism. It's a question of what is, Okay, it's like... this is one of the fundamentals in Buddhism, actually, and this is certainly in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that really beginning to understand what is consciousness. Okay, let me just say some things about it now that it's moving into this, and I'll come back to your question, but I think it's appropriate to talk a bit about karma and what the consciousness is. That we have... Buddhism would say, okay, the tradition we're involved with goes into the teachings. Consciousness necessarily isn't physical. Necessarily. It's not possible to be. Consciousness isn't your brain, isn't your body, isn't your senses. This is just but we have different levels of consciousness. We have a gross level, which is conceptual and sensory. And that effectively is all we ever experience. We have a subtle, but this consciousness is a continuity that is becoming ever more subtle. We have much subtler levels of consciousness, and we touch on those occasionally in dreams. And we have even a subtler level of consciousness. And for the subtler level, including even the dream consciousness, all the way down to the very subtle level, in Buddhist terms, don't need the body to function, which is how come even people have experiences of leaving their body. I mean, ordinary people leave their body in dreams and astral travel, all this stuff which we mystify quite a bit. But this, in Buddhist terms, is to show how consciousness isn't the body. Otherwise, how can it leave the body? If it's the same thing, it could not possibly separate. It's insane to say that. So to really know that consciousness, even the gross conceptual level and the sensory, which at this moment is literally who you are, but because the body depends on the existence of the functioning brain and the functioning gross consciousness, doesn't mean they're the same thing. So it's not a dualism. It's not a mistake. It simply means they're interdependent, but they're not the same. And so this leads you to eventually in the Buddhist principle of reincarnation. If your body is your mind, obviously reincarnation is ridiculous. Your brain turns into caca in the ground. It doesn't go anywhere. So do you see what I'm getting at? At the most practical level, to first know that your consciousness isn't your body is already kind of can be liberating. And so sure, there are many approaches, and one you're talking about is one approach. Another approach is to simply, which is in our tradition, if the body gets painful, move it. I mean, just move your leg, you know. No, I know. Okay, I hear. So then that's why. Okay, in the Tibetan tradition, we have all sorts of meditations. And one, for example, would be a simple focusing meditation to focus on the breath. We have many meditations which use visualization. So when you even have a little bit of concentration and you visualize the Buddha, because your focus isn't in here, it's out there on this visualization, then immediately you forget about your body. It just is not part of the consciousness. But that's up to you and your techniques and how you're working. So I'm just giving you our example. So and I'm not much of a meditator in the sense of sitting with good concentration, but I do know even when I'm doing some prayers, we have many prayers in our practice. If I can get a feeling for those prayers and visualizing the Buddha, immediately I'm not so conscious of my body. Immediately, even though my concentration is quite gross. So there are different techniques, but that's very much because if you have a certain teacher and certain practice, you go your way. I'm not being very helpful, I don't think. I'm just chatting away here. That's great. Good. I mean, great, you know. I mean, I remember doing Kung Fu. We used to do Kung Fu, and the teacher was pushing us like crazy, and all these push-ups on our knuckles, and he'd just say, it's only the body. You know, it's only the body. I mean, there are many ways, you know. If you even... Another way of saying, for example, Lama Zopa, are we really strict on time?
Well,
are we strict? I mean, do you have to get out of here by 12 or something? You kicked out?
We usually stop at noon, but it doesn't look like everyone's... Let's go on.
Okay. For example, you know, as Lama Zopa says, when we really begin to understand emptiness, then everything is as we label it, which sounds a bit cosmic, you know. So basically he would say, you know, if someone abuses you, he was being very wrathful here. He said, what's abuse? If you label it abuse, if you feel abused, then it is abuse. But if you don't feel abused, it is not abuse. So if you label it pain, it is pain. If you label it bad, it is bad. Okay, it's not as easy as this, but in a sense it is as easy as that. It's just that we've done it for eons. It makes it difficult to stop that labelling. You know, so even I know with my own mind, sometimes when there's pain in my leg, my particular one of my thighs gets pain when I'm cross-legged. I try to just even mentally stop calling it pain. And I mean, you can get a glimmer immediately. If I persevered with that, definitely it would change. Yeah, it's just the body. And this is your teacher, you're right. Try and learn about emptiness. Go on.
Welcome back.
Okay.
This is a relatively serious question.
Oh, very serious. Won't laugh then.
As soon as I'm attached to this question.
Okay, I will laugh like crazy, okay? Come on.
I want you to answer it.
Out with it. Okay. Talk about control here. Come on, out with it.
All right, it's coming. In Buddhist teaching, In Buddhist teaching, there's a distinction between the absolute and the relative. The absolute sort of being the nature of mind, Buddha mind, which is...
No, that's not absolute. But anyway, we won't argue now. Go on.
Boundaryless.
Let me hear what you're saying.
Yeah, okay. I'm unconditioned. Pardon me.
Whatever, go on.
All right. Relatively speaking, there are things that are the results of causes, conditions, forms, feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness, delusion, as
whatever.
you described.
Okay.
Relatively speaking, I call myself, or think of myself, describe myself as homosexual and Buddhist.
Yeah.
All right. Lately, there's been very mixed messages. Well, I don't know. I don't think it's even been lately. I think it's been for quite a while.
Where from? Mixed messages.
Mixed messages from the Dalai Lama.
Oh, about what?
About homosexuality.
What does he say?
I'll read it to you.
Okay, we've got time. Have we got an hour here?
There's two sources here. First of all, to pretext this a little bit, he's a tremendous inspiration to me. I love this man.
Yes.
I mean, he's a remarkable man.
Yes.
And there have been consistently inconsistent messages now for the last couple of years, some of which have been distributed through GBF in the newsletter.
Right.
A couple of, well, actually this year, there's a new book out, which a friend found in the bookstore called Beyond Dogma.
Yes.
It's got a wonderful picture of God.
Yes.
Wow, I saw the title, I went, Yahoo! Beyond Dogma. Page 47, 46 rather. What are improper sexual attitudes? What do you think of homosexuality, for example? Something may be considered improper in terms of organs, time, and place. When sexual relations involve inappropriate parts of the body, or when they occur at an unsuitable time or place. These are the terms Buddhists use to describe sexual misconduct.
Right.
The inappropriate parts of the body are the mouth and the anus, and sexual intercourse involving those parts of the body, whether with a man or a woman, is considered sexual misconduct. Masturbation as well. This is the hand as well. Okay. As a gay person...
You're out, honey. Listen, this is... Okay. Don't need to read any more. It's okay.
No, I want to mention a couple of things.
Oh, okay.
This is under his name.
Okay.
This is not the first time this has happened. In another book that's in the Station bookstore.
Sure.
Freedom.
Honey, it's in the Buddhist teachings, all right?
Well, I want to find out where it is.
But don't... Okay.
And also...
But I want to now talk about it. Don't go any more details. We get the point, okay?
He says exactly the opposite.
I understand. Oh, okay. That's also... Okay, I know. I hear you. Okay.
Interview
I hear
2
you.
years ago.
Exactly. I
He
hear
goes,
you.
go here, wrong, and stops himself and says, if someone comes to me and asks whether he's okay or not, I will
Sure.
first ask you if you have some religious vows to uphold. Then my question is, what is your companion's opinion? If you both agree, he laughed heartily, which only he can.
Sure.
Then I think I would say, if two males or two females voluntarily agree to have mutual satisfaction without further implication of harming others, then it is okay. He also said that using one's hand is not harming on others, and if you have no vow, then it is simply for temporary satisfaction.
Sure. Great.
All right,
Do you want things to be consistent or something? Do you need permission or something? I'm now being provocative, but I'm not seriously being.
what did you just say?
I don't know what I said. Okay, this is really interesting for us in the West, I know. And I mean, for myself too, as a Buddhist, over the years, trying to kind of, when I hear certain things, for example, that, you can get these types of things, hearing over the years from different lamas, different levels of teachings, different comprehensions, So how I'm trying to put it together is like this. When I heard, for example, Tibetan medical, from the point of view of Tibetan medical texts, they talk about, in the point of view of Tantra, for example, there are the subtle energies, the subtle central channels, and the subtle, all the subtle energy that you learn about in Buddhist Tantra, which is not appropriate to discuss here. But they talk about, and so a lot of the medical texts, this is when I heard something like this, a lot of the medical texts are based on that, are based on the subtle physiology of this central channel and the chakras and the central channel on the male ends of the penis and the central channel on the female ends of the cervix, and then all, as we know, all the tantric teachings are based on the relationship between the male and the female physiology. So anyway, so I heard, for example, one of the medical texts that it's just something that these teachings come from something to do with the physiology, the subtle physiology, that there's something to do with a kind of a relationship between the central channels when it talks about sexual union. So, okay, I don't know what to say about it. I'm just saying this, okay? So what am I saying here? I was getting to a point, and I can't remember. No, I know. I don't know how to deal with this. For example, I've heard lots of things in Buddhism that are said, according to Buddha, women this, lesser rebirth, the name in Tibetan for woman is actually meaning inferior rebirth, all these sorts of things. So how, over the years too, trying to find a way, without being personal about it, without being freaked out about it. I mean, when I first met Tibetan Lamas, I've been a radical lesbian feminist for 2 or 3 years, right? I wouldn't even look at you guys. I wouldn't even have talked to any one of you. Believe me, I would have punched you first. Believe me. I wouldn't... So I'm coming along and I bump into Tibetan Lama. I decided, at this point, that I'd sort of blamed white people, the whole of white people for the suffering of the world. Then I blamed rich people. Then I blamed all the males. And I realised I had nobody left to blame. So I thought, I better start looking at Robina. This is when I bumped into Tibetan Lamas. And it was at this point that I'd been feminist. So all I know is I instinctively trusted if there was some kind of anguish in me, it shows there's something for me to work on. So what I knew is I was going to look at Buddhism, see the truth there, try and find the relative reality of all this thing about female this, and at that time I'd not heard teachings on certain physical actions being called sexual misconduct, right? I hadn't heard any of that stuff. It was mainly at the level of the female-male one, but I knew I had to deal with something here, because when I heard the Buddhist teachings on karma and consciousness and this and that and all this stuff, that here I am 20 years later still happy with it, and I have worked with something in myself, and even though I still see relative reality of Tibetan monks sitting in front of Tibetan women, nuns, and the nuns, I mean, it's something that I'm trying to work out to recognise cultural level. Now, as to this one of certain physical acts, and that I think is the thing. If I try to really boil something down to what Buddhism is saying is so-called negative or positive in anything, it's not, the aim isn't to sort of, like in the West, for example, here in this culture, when you say homosexuality is bad, what you see, you paint the whole person, and everything they do, they're kind of imbued with this badness. You're intrinsically bad. Everything you do is bad. If you are labelled homosexual, then you are always bad. Everything you do is kind of tainted. Now, what Buddhism doesn't have view like that, and it's even the one about the female one. What I've tried to see is more and more remove the emotional content from it. It's to do with literally certain actions, which I said in the conventional thing of these texts and blah, 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 that from the very actually subtle kind of level and from the point of view of certain vows, whatever, I just still kind of put it together myself. Certain physical actions are said to be deluded. Now, okay, I don't know what to say to all you guys. I'm not trying to say it is wrong or it's not wrong. All I know is, like, I had to deal with the female one to try and see where it was coming from. What was the reality? What does it mean? Is it ultimately true? Is it relatively true? What does it mean for me? That's all I can say. I'm not trying to give a quick answer here. So I do know, though, I do definitely know there are different levels of teachings, different levels of vows, different levels of practice. And as he says, have you got a vow? Okay, according to Tantra, and these teachings are the very esoteric teachings, and they're very, very pure, and I'm not trying to dilute them by talking about it here. But there are certain vows. And there it's virtually impossible to have any kind of sex at all where you even lose any energy. That's actually breaking your vow. Now, it's kind of like everything is relative. Everything is relative to your commitment, who you are, what your life is. And as, so still what it means, a certain action is more polluted action. So putting a penis in an anus instead of a penis in vagina. Okay, I don't know what it means. I'm trying to work it out too. So all you guys have got to do, if it's a difficult situation for you, leave it spacious, let it go, take the stuff that's good, try and understand what it means, know that you're not being painted by being a bad person. I mean,
homosexuality is okay. It's just doing anything that's not.
Well, it's like, give it space. I mean, I'm not trying to cop out here. Just
I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're saying, because it's true. I mean, space is everything. And
sure.
Given the Calvin pasture is a good thing.
I think, and that's something I really did get. Otherwise, as soon as there's something hit here, I know I've got something to learn, There's something for me to look at. Okay, I've got to give it space, find out the reality of this. If there is some truth in it, then, but it's like saying, Buddha's saying that anger is a delusion. And then I think, I'm angry. It's not fair. He's criticising all angry people. How dare he? But it's like freaking out about it. All I know is I've got to kind of know that it's just a part of me. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person because it's not Robina who is angry. It's just anger that's not positive, that's all. It's just a part of me. The rest, everything else I do, the loving, so you have a relationship and you're a loving, compassionate person. That's positive. I don't know what else to say. The thing is, I think, part of the West and the function of this ego-grasping ignorance is that we hugely kind of Mount Everest everything. labels and concepts take on huge meaning and highly emotive. And with that, we can't hear something. So, I mean, all I can say is give it great space. There's a relative reality of this culture now. There is a lot of homosexuality, a lot of just be who we are. I don't know what to say, really. Give it space, Go on.
Yeah, I would also like to say, and then ask your opinion of this. What I see when you look at a tantric text, this is something that was worked out in a positive sense for men and women to get their energies aligned in order to enlighten themselves reciprocally. And we can draw this false conclusion that it says anything about homosexuals trying to do a similar task. They're lining up their chakras and their energy channels in a certain way that works for them. They can't write our book. If we feel ourselves to be a certain type of human incarnation that has a certain way of fitting together, that's different and that evolved over time to be appropriate to this body, I think it's our task to determine how we make our own tantra. It's not, it can't be an ancient teaching.
Yeah, but I think also I would be careful about all that kind of talk, because I think...
Well, I am too.
About tantra, because, excuse me, it's like, I don't even want to bring that in here, because it's something actually, especially in the Tibetan tradition, the teachings are so kind of, I'm not trying to say, wholly pure, but can be so even, and I'm not even talking irregular sex. People assume, and excuse me with great respect, you're talking about the level of sexual energy, sexual union, But I mean, Tantra, when it finally comes to it, according to the teachings that I received, basically the person who's qualified to practice Tantra, which is totally internal, is a person who's a fully ordained monk or nun, who has no sexual union at all. It's visualization and dealing with the subtler energies. The really pure level of Tantra is that. So I just want to add that bit. But I think the real point for me here is that the point of a person who is a Buddhist is to be able to hear whatever is out there without emotional identification, without neurosis, learning to have a courage to see if there's any truth in it, to try and understand if it is said this is so, then how is it so, but leaving it if it doesn't make sense to us. And meanwhile, every second having a pure motivation, every second trying to benefit others, every second trying to develop love and compassion. So if 2%, 1% of your day you're doing something that is said to be negative, excuse me, you're doing pretty well. In other words, being even who you are, don't define yourself by a person who puts a penis in an anus, excuse me. Do you see my point? It's too obsessive. Excuse me, you do more than just do that all day if you're a homosexual. So it's kind of slightly exaggerating. Do you see my point? Or having an anus to get the penis put in it, whatever. I mean, give it space, boys. It's all right. So even the fact that we have to have a label for an identity based on a certain action seems almost a bit ridiculous in a way, Do you see what I'm getting at? Kind of give it space. Please.
Can we say
what? Shall we finish?
We should probably finish
Why?
and continue this. People are leaving.
Well, let them leave. That's all right. No, I mean, excuse me, you're the boss. Please, you
I'm not the boss. I'm just saying people are leaving. We have a coffee hour and we could continue.
Oh, I see.
Among ourselves.
Okay, as you wish.
But it's pretty neat now. Does anyone want to leave? Or
maybe we can offer a dedication and then the people
Yeah, sure. Good idea.
Okay, I think today we could stay in here, and if people want to continue the talk, have a little special spin.
Okay. Well, can I do a dedication prayer, or is that what you do?
Oh, no, please do it.
Okay. Okay. So just 1 minute, okay? 2 minutes. Think like this. Think, okay. We've been sitting here, hour and a half, 2 hours, each of us in our own way, trying to be positive, trying to look at our minds, listening, thinking about Buddha's teachings, trying to apply it, whatever. So masses of kind of positive aspiration. And karmically, this means every second of this time we've been kind of moulding our own mind in a positive direction. Putting something positive into our mind stream. So this we rejoice in. This we are glad about. And this we dedicate. We dedicate it, meaning that we're kind of make the strong aspiration that this energy that we have planted in our mind, that it grow into our enlightenment, into our wisdom, into our compassion in the future, for our own sake and the sake of every living being. Jangchob semchog Rinpoche makye panam kegyochig kepanyam pa me payang gong ne gong du palwa shok. Okay. Everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.